Chronos, is clock time. That you can put on your planner, your PDA, whatever. But Kairos, K-A-I-R-O-S, you cannot plan. That's opportunity time. Opportunity time comes at unexpected points. And a man needs to have enough margin in his thought life and in his own journey to be at least open to the possibility of those unexpected divine appointments that are Kairos opportunities. Make the most of your Chiron, of those opportunities, because the days are evil. And this is why I've said before that the most significant thing you do for the kingdom of God by using that as your criterion, this day will probably not be on your planner. It'll be something that God put there for you. And it may be that He'll impress you to call someone, or to pray for someone, or help someone. It's any number of possible things that may be, or meet someone, run into somebody. You never know what those Kairos moments might be. They're often perceived as interruptions. And so Thomas Merton, I think it was, no, Omri Nouwen said, I used to pray that God would remove the interruptions to my ministry. Then I realized they are my ministry. It's an interesting perspective. But these are divine appointments that will pop up at unexpected moments. So make the most of those divine opportunities. They're not going to come again. And use your time wisely. Be careful how you walk. Not as unwise men, but as wise. Make the most of your time.
Ken, is Kairos, is that
could you stand up, please?
Oh, sure. Is that C-H-I-R?
No, Kairos is K-A-I-R-O-S. Rather than Chronos, which is C-H-R-O-N-O-S. Chronos, chronology, chronometer, that's where we get that word. But Kairos is a special word that's used in this context. So we want then to live with wisdom. Once again, we're talking about the wisdom of the long-term perspective. Any other thoughts before? Yes.
I've been trying to formulate a question in my head. Talk about how our culture has been a great impact on our Christian walk. How do we, as church leaders, keep our culture and the evolution of technology from creeping into our worship and then causing us to be casual Christians because of that? Those things?
Yes, that's an excellent question. He's really asking the question of how is it that we can, and I'm a big believer in leveraging technology for good. I think that there are some wonderful things that we can do through the internet and through other vehicles, no question about it. But you're expressing the concern that a person or a group or a church might get seduced by certain cultural apparatus that can then actually shape and affect the nature of the worship experience itself. That's a very real possibility. This is why Neil Postman years ago wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he described how we've moved from an oral culture to a written culture to a visual culture. And his contention, it's an interesting one, was that he believed that the medium of television actually so distorted the message of religion. He was no believer, but the message of religion that he almost thought they were inimical. Now, he might be going farther than some, but the thing you have to ask yourself is, am I being used by this or am I using this? And if, for example, we continue in the process of where we are, and one of them is that the church is affected by several things, by psychological models, management models, and entertainment models. You see, when I say psychological, I mean the whole idea of just group therapy and that sort of a thing, and just a feel-good kind of approach. That's what I'm thinking about, the popular approach. When I think about management models, just trying to focus on how we can see this as an organization and make that the most effective thing rather than an organism. And by entertainment models, where we reduce worship to entertainment. What is the phrase by George Gilder? Men play at their worship, worship at their play. What is it? Worship their work, play at their worship, and what's the third one? Work at their play. Yeah, they work at their play. That's not a bad description. So they play at their worship. Now, Tozer, you want to read a book that'll be, think about a guy like Tozer waking up now. I mean, it's almost phenomenal. If you were to read his Pursuit of God, which I surely encourage you all to read, it's certainly one of the greats in this, of the spiritual classics, in my view, of all time. If you were to read that book, you could see him already, even in 1948, being most concerned about the very kind of issues that you're talking about, where the church has been seduced by these kinds of things. Imagine what he'd think now. So you have to evaluate, is this thing really, if we're not careful, even our own hymnody has changed, if we're not careful, whereby originally it was more focused on the greatness of who God is. Now it's more what he can do for me, you see? And if you do a comparison of the old hymns and compare those with more recent choruses and so forth, you'll discover that's the case. And that represents a theological change based upon, I believe, a cultural shift. So that you have to be very, very careful in terms of being aware, how can I most effectively use this culture but without being seduced by it? And that's going to be a case and church-specific issue. Churches have different ethos. There are some churches that appeal more to one group, maybe a younger, some more to an older group, or whatever it might be. Some are more liturgical, some are more informal. I don't have any problem with differences in that respect. But one needs to be very careful of evaluating technology so that it doesn't just get it doesn't creep in and begin to dominate us by its own agenda. I guess that's kind of how I'd say. So I'd have to ask then, how does it genuinely lead to what the scriptures describe as worship? Now, having just taught Jonathan Edwards a treatise concerning the religious affections, my mind is brimming with ideas of the signs of the true affections. And frankly, they're about as relevant now as they were when he wrote them in the 18th century. The true signs of something that God is doing. And I think it's, there are some things or some criteria we can use. Any other thoughts, or should we? Okay, one more and then I'll move on.
I'm reading a book called Crazy Love.
Crazy Love.
By Francis Chan. And he has two chapters that are the most convicting that I've ever read. Comparing the church today with Laodicea, and lukewarm, where he quotes rationalizations from churches and contrasts it with the Gospels, what Jesus said. And then the next one is, do you give God your leftovers? And I challenge...
God your leftovers? Yeah.
Do you give God just your leftovers?
Yeah. Well, we live, let's be honest about it, in a culture that is characterized by, as one writer put it, narcissism, pragmatism, and unbridled restlessness. That characterizes our time. Narcissism, pragmatism, and unbridled restlessness. And those are inimical to the gospel. That's just the nature of it. And if we're not careful, they'll even be characterized in the corporate context of worship. Let me see. Oh, is there a question over here? Is your finger pointing over here? Okay. Oh, yes, Glenn. Yeah.
I work a lot with adolescents, and in this group we're talking about some of us are children, some of us are grandchildren. And in terms of what you're saying about knowing the media, we really need to know what these kids are watching. And we can't ever get into their world. They live in a different world. We can glimpse it and we can occasionally visit it. But if we ignore it, then we can't just set the example anymore and expect them to follow it. Just a good example of that is my kids got caught up with Friends. And I started watching the show. And it's entertaining. It's well written. They have genuine relationships between the cast members. The problem with it is that it teaches very clearly that everybody can have sex with everybody. Everybody can get married to everybody and get divorced, and it'll all turn out all right in the end. And our kids see this over and over again. Unless you know what they're watching, you can't talk to them about it. And I think we have a responsibility to speak into what their culture is.
Yeah, that's a very good word. And one of the things that I do is I teach movies. And so I just created a presentation for the Colson's Wilberforce Forum. They have the Centurions program, and it's how to read a film. which is an interesting thing. And among other things, I was teaching how to look at a film from a worldviewish perspective, as well as from a technical perspective. And one of the best things we can do is to actually see a film with our sons or daughters and then discuss it afterwards. What does that thing tell us? Talk about the technical aspects of the film, the various aspects, but about the story and so forth. But what does it tell us about the human condition? What does it tell us about what people are like? What's the problem with the human condition? What's the solution that it's offering? What does it tell us about hope or purpose or meaning? And that can be very, very helpful, because now what you're doing is you're building at least a measure of common ground. And while Glenn is right in saying that we can never fully enter into that world, at least we can have some connections and very real points of contact. And